On March the 13th, 1965, the Albanian community in the United States of America and Albanians throughout the world lost their most distinguished leader of the Albanian Renaissance, the well-known patriot, religious leader, poet, writer, spokesman of the League of Nations, composer, translator and philosopher, Fan S Noli. Thousands of people, followers and friends, and official delegations from around the world assembled at St. George Albanian Orthodox Church, which Bishop Noli built with his own hands. They came to say goodbye for the last time, passing in silence where his body lay covered with the Albanian flag. After religious services led by priests he himself ordained, Bishop Noli was complimented by Secretary of the Archdiocese, Religiouse.
The passing away from this life of our beloved Metropolitan Fan S Noli has cast a dark shadow.
His remains were taken to Forest Hill Cemetery in Boston. Among many speeches given by friends was this special telegram sent by the Albanian socialist government, part of which said, "Fan Noli left us at the moment of deciding to return to his homeland, something he had dreamed of throughout his life, to see Albania free." As he himself once said in a poem, "For as summer follows winter, we will return sometime to the hearth and the workshop, by the banks of the Vios and the Boon." But his death made impossible his last hope. Professor Peter Prifty, a follower of Noli, made his in memoriam speech.
His life spanned 2 centuries, his activities 2 continents, his achievements 2 periods in the history of Albania. Endowed with rare gifts of mind, possessing a keen social consciousness, and devoted to the ideal of Albanian nationalism and human brotherhood, he made outstanding and lasting contributions to the cause of Albanian independence, the Albanian Orthodox Church, Albanian diplomacy, history, poetry, and literature. He built our church and taught us to worship God in the language of our forefathers. With his writings in history, his translations of the classics in world literature, his poetic achievements, and his work as a clergyman and diplomat, he helped to develop in us a sense of our common background, deepened our understanding and affection for the land of our origin, made us appreciate the beauty, power, and range of the Albanian language, taught us to be proud of our heritage, and inspired us to worship together in the Albanian Orthodox Church of America, which he founded, developed, and sustained for over 50 years. He was a good shepherd, respected, admired, obeyed. We cherished him when he lived, and we cherish him now that he is gone, for he is still with us in spirit. He is a living part of our church and our faith. The decade of the 80s is especially important for the Albanians in the United States for 2 reasons. One, because in 1882 or thereabout, the first Albanian to come to the United States to settle here arrived in the United States. His name is Nicholas Christopher. The other reason why the 1980s are so important for the Albanians in America is that Fan Noli, Bishop Fan S Noli, was born in the year 1882. Bishop Noli came to the United States a little later. He arrived here in 1906. He came from Egypt, where he had been for a while, and met there several Albanian nationalists. Jani Vruho was one of them, Spiro Dine was another, and it was on their recommendation that he came to the United States, because they said that the United States is a place where you can do the most good, where the need is greatest for someone like you to build up the national spirit and to mobilize, to organize the Albanians in the United States for the national cause, to serve the interests of Albanian nationalism at that time, which was, of course, a very, very great issue. It was something that was in the wind, in the air, something that all the Albanians were all over the world were very much interested and concerned about, because they wanted to see Albania an independent country, an independent nation, free from the domination of the Turks.
And so it happens. Fan Noli arrives in the United States of America May 10th, 1906, settling in Jamestown, New York, among the members of a patriotic society called Longing for the Motherland. Subsequently, he moves to Boston to work with Sotir Petsi, founder of the first Albanian weekly newspaper, The Nation. In 1907, he founds the Oath of Loyalty Society in Boston, and on March 8, 1908, he is ordained priest.
A young Albanian died in here, in the United States, and then, being of Orthodox, there were no Albanian Orthodox churches. But because of the politics, the Greeks refused. No church should refuse anything. The church should be separated. See, the church should not take interest in the politics. And they refused to give a bureau to this young Albanian as a Christian. So they had to take him to a Syrian church on it. Later, after the Albanians, after they began to talk and see how the Greeks acted, they felt that there was no one than Noli to be their leader, spiritual leader. And they pointed out to Noli that he should be the one in here. So he was the first to establish an Orthodox Albanian church in America. And the direct result was, or the cause, from this young man that was refused to have a Christian bureau.
The day on which he conducted his first Albanian liturgy is a turning point in the history of the Albanian Renaissance. We cannot forget it, and we cannot permit others to forget it. Unquestionably, his major role as a churchman was the translation of over 44 books into Albanian and then into English, many of them liturgical books, to provide the Albanian people with the ability and the opportunity to worship in the language of their origin.
Then Fan Noli continued, of course, with his activities in the interest of Albanian nationalism, Albanian independence in the United States, and very soon became the leader of the Albanian community in the United States. He continued with his education at Harvard University and won his Bachelor of Arts in 1912. Then, of course, he was the head of the Albanian Church, Albanian Orthodox Church in the United States, which was founded in 1908.
On April 28, 1912, Fan Noli founds the Pan-Albanian Federation of America, called Vatra, which becomes one of the most influential voices of Albanian national identity. He is to retain both an active and an honorary presidency throughout his lifetime. On November the 28th, 1912, the Albanian flag is raised for the first time in 500 years over the city of Vlora, and Albania proclaims its independence. In 1913, he's asked to speak at the Albanian Congress in Trieste, Austria, convened to open foreign blockades of Albania. He visits Albanian communities all over Europe and makes connection with the progressives trying to help Albania gain independence. 1914, the newly formed government is overthrown, and once again the Albanian people lose their freedom. Fan Noli returns to the United States. July the 4th, 1918, Fan Noli meets with President Wilson on the presidential yacht Mayflower to speak for the Albanian nation. He receives the president's pledge to support the rights of the Albanian nation. Said Wilson, "I should have but one voice at the peace conference at Versailles, and I will use that voice in behalf of Albania." On July 27, 1919, Fan Noli is appointed Bishop-elect of the Albanian Orthodox Church of America by the acclamation of his people. In 1920, he is appointed Albania's representative to the League of Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. Fan Noli is widely acclaimed as a statesman and as an articulate spokesman of the Albanian cause.
Theo Fan Noli's principal contribution as a churchman was in his translation of the Orthodox Divine Liturgy into the Albanian language in 1908. Then surely his major achievement as a statesman were his singular efforts in gaining Albania's admission to the League of Nations on December 17th, 1920. The Manchester Guardian, one of the prestigious newspapers of England, in its editorial shortly after this, made the following tribute to him. Fan Noli is a man who would have been remarkable in any country. An accomplished diplomat, an expert in international politics, a skillful debater. From the outset, he made a deep impression in Geneva. He knocked down his Balkan opponents in a masterly fashion, but always with a smile. He is a man of vast culture who has read everything worth reading in English and French. Thus, Noli himself would say that his efforts in gaining Albania's admission to the League of Nations in 1920 were his major contribution to the Albanian nation. For the first time in 5 centuries, Albania's borders were recognized, one of the principal areas of contention in the Balkan area.
1924, following a revolution in Albania, Fan Noli's dream is realized. On June 17th, by popular vote, he is elected Prime Minister of Albania and forms a new cabinet. As active regent, he attempts agrarian reforms and institutes democratic policies. Once, a writer asked Noli whether he thought his name would live on in Albanian history. He replied, "If my name lives on, it will be in Albanian literary annals." From 1925 to 1965, he wrote histories, biographies, and poetry, and made translations into Albanian from the classics, ranging from Omar Khayyam to Don Quixote, and from Shakespeare to Ibsen. He Americanized the Albanian church by translating all the required books of ritual into English to meet the needs of the younger generation.
Literature, Fan Noli is recognized as the first great modern man in the field in Albanian literature. He is the first one who translated the great classics. The translation by Noli of Cervantes' work, the Don Quixote in 5 volumes, is remarkable not only for the language in which he has rendered it, I mean the style, and the accuracy but also because of the criticism or the interpretation that he makes of the work in the introduction of the translation. He says that this was very, very timely, very applicable to Albania and to the Albanian people because of the conditions which he saw as more or less comparable. I mean, the social and the economic conditions of Spain at the time that Cervantes wrote, and the conditions in Albania in Noli's time, the time that he did the translation. He says that the common people were, well, they were oppressed, or they were suffering because of the unjust economic, political system in Spain at the time, and the same condition exists in Albania. And he says that it's a work that makes us laugh, but also because of its seriousness, it's a work that makes us cry. He says that let us hope that we will laugh much more in the future than in the past, because we have cried enough as a people.
Though not a native of Albania, Noli ranks foremost among the makers of modern Albania. Fan Noli's poetry and writings had a great influence on the upcoming generations of Albania from the beginning of this century until today. This is only one of his poems, which he wrote in 1930, after the failure of his revolution. A scene from the movie Red Poppies on the Wall, the true story which takes place during the Second World War in occupied Albania.
Ku e lam e kunam mbeti, vajvat vatan e mirë mileti, anës detit I palar, anës dritës I papar, pranë sofrës I pangron.
Anës dritës I papar, pranë sofrës I pangron, pranë dijes I panzën, nga kurishve I dregosur, trupe shpirti sakatosur. Se që pren, se që vran, që shkretuon në anë mban, në fundrën e përdhunës, anës vjosës, anës punës. Po një zëvë ngon nga lumi, më buqet, më zjon nga gjumi, se mileti po gatitet, se tirani lebetitet, se pëlqet, kërcet fortuna, fryet vjosat, derdhet buna, skuqet semani dhe drini, dridhet beu dhe zëngjini, se pas vdekjes, ndriti jeta dhe kudo që mon trumpeta, ngreuni dhe bjeruni, korrini dhe shtypini, katundare punëtor, që nga Shkodra, qërë vlorë.
We were pleased to discover two hitherto lost manuscripts, one of the Albanian Rhapsody and the second of a Byzantine overture, which was composed by Fan Noli as part of his music bachelor's degree at the Boston Conservatory of Music. But Noli simply didn't write music for symphonic orchestras. He was interested in the common person. He was himself of peasant stock and always loved the village people. His translations of the choral music of the Orthodox Church, first into Albanian and even later into English, are testimony to this. He loved directing the choir. He loved to have young voices, to teach them how to breathe, what the diaphragm was in the body, how to project. And many people who became actively involved in the in the choirs and in their later professions owe their debt of gratitude to Metropolitan Fan Noli.
He also, to keep us youth together, translated the liturgy into English. And not only that, he had his priests, even though they spoke broken English, do part of the liturgy in English. He was a hard taskmaster, and he wanted something done. You had to do it. But he was the type of chap that when he did it, he gave a reward. And how did he give a reward? By just saying thank you, and that's all he needed from him. Because of him, we have this beautiful music. I myself get so touched with it that I'm singing in the choir. This is what he's given us.
Fan Noli left his entire collection of manuscripts, books, tape recordings to the Archdiocese. I think this was very important in his case because he wanted his collection not to be part of a museum, something only for research, but something connected with a living institution such as the church which he helped to establish. He wanted students, youngsters, elders, scholars, all to use his volumes, many of which are here. This is only a tip of the iceberg. We have over 10,000 letters, correspondence from his collection. We have about 5,000 volumes, many of them rare. Here, for example, we have some of his own works, which he himself translated and wrote. This shelf here. We also have books in English concerning Albanology, Albanian culture and what have you. Albanian history is here in the next section. Albanian literature, the Orthodox Church, ecclesiastical literature, Albanian language volumes. We have some of the rare books that are unavailable even at some of the major American universities. And of course, Albanian liturgical books of all the faith, the Orthodox faith, the Roman Catholic, the Muslim, and what have you. So we're very proud of this library as being a working library connected with a living institution, not simply one which is reserved for scholars or for an elite. We're interested in the library serving the people which Metropolitan Fan Noli himself served. At the same time, some of the features here might interest us. For example, this piano was one at which he did many of his compositions, his translations of Orthodox liturgical music, and this was, as you know, music was so much a part of his career. His choir, 3 years ago in 1978, when we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the Albanian Orthodox Church, in his honor published Mesha Shkip, containing the liturgical hymns of Holy Week and Easter, and some original hymns of the Orthodox Church which Metropolitan Noli himself composed. At the same time, we have one of his bookcases with volumes in many of the languages he knew: German, Greek, Arabic, in addition, of course, to Albanian and English, Slavonic, Russian, and we know in his last years he was learning Aramaic, and on the day of his death, on his desk in Florida, at the home which the Albanian people provided for him, we found a manuscript of Genesis. He began translating the Old Testament now into English, modern English, from the original Hebraic and Aramaic sources. This is the type of man he was. Many people tried to say Fan Noli was only an Albanian patriot, and he used the church and all the institutions for Albanian patriotism. Others suggested he was really a scholar who only desired to do research, and research to field which was up until this time yet unexplored, namely the field, various aspects of Albanian studies. At the same time, it's my impression, I knew him as a child, as a teenager, sitting at his feet when he visited my parents' home. In my impression, Noli was truly a Renaissance man. He was at ease in all these fields. He never used one to taint the other. He was an extremely objective man. Although he was a patriot in the Albanian sense, he also was very much the scholar and could keep the various compartments of his life in their proper perspective. And this is why I, for one, admire Noli and await the centenary of his birth in 1982.
He was our religious leader as Albanian Orthodox, but more than that, he was our mentor in the morality and in ethics of our lives. And he was more of a teacher and our mentor, to imbue in us the history of Albania and the movement of the Albanian movement in order to establish a state of Albania. When I'm speaking of 1920, in that period in time, you know, there was great conflict in Albania. And he taught us how we should put every ounce of strength we had. And incidentally, at one period in time, about $175,000 was raised in the United States. And people like my father were earning $6 and $7 a week, and they pledged their month's salary for the movement. That's how charismatic he was, and that's how...
When George Gusho was the manager of Iria those days, he had gone to Albania and he came back. And he had talked to different officials here, and they wanted him to go to Albania very bad. You know, Albanian people were waiting for him with open arms because they had been heard about his history and what he's done for Albania and for the writing about Albania and all the translations. He had done such a terrific job that they wanted to meet him personally. So George asked me about it, and I says, look, can I go? Can you take me to Fan Noli? I says, I'll take you to Fan Noli. So we went to Fan Noli, and he asked, and he told him just what I said about how the people of Albania wanted to meet him so badly, and some of the high officials had told him to come, to ask Fan Noli to come to Albania, so the people could see Fan Noli. They wanted to meet him. So he said, well, you know, those days was a little, right after the McCarthy era, this and that, and he said maybe politically it doesn't look so good, and he was making excuses not to go, and also his health was not that good, you know, he was getting old, and it was about 5-6 years before he died, and he had been having trouble, see, so he wasn't a strong man. Fan Noli was never, all through his life, he was a sort of anemic man. He was never wasn't a big eater. For a long time he was a vegetarian. I know this for a fact. See, he didn't eat anything but vegetables for about 25, 30 years.
Of course, he had a tremendous sense of humor. Probably one of the best orators I've ever heard, whether it was Albanian or any other nationality. He captivated an audience, and his humor was dry, and he told stories that were just... I can't tell some of them because he would be the one to tell them. For instance, he told a story one time. He said there was once a priest who would go to a wedding or a christening, and they'd ask him to take a drink, and he took a drink, but he couldn't say no to him, so he kept drinking, and then he got, in Albanian we say uberdru, but in English I think he said you got stoned, you know, and the donkey would take him home, but one day the donkey wanted to drink some water, and he took him in a Perua, in a brook, to drink a little water. And the donkey drank, and then the priest said to the donkey, drink a little more, and the donkey went this way. He says, drink a little more, to the donkey went this way. And finally the priest says, you should have been the priest. He says, not me. No, he could get away with a story like that.
Distinguished guests on the head table, ladies and gentlemen, when Nasreddin Hoxha was a young man, he saw a dream. One day he wanted his father to explain it to him, what was the meaning of that dream. His father said, yes, I'll be glad to explain your dream if you tell me what it was. Well, he said, I dreamt of ice cream, lots of ice cream. Well, his father said, I can explain you your dream, I can interpret your dream, if you give me $1. Well, retorted Nasreddin Hoxha, if I had $1, I would not be dreaming of ice cream, I would be eating it.
You know, Fan Noli had a good temper. Oh yeah? He had really an Albanian, what we call Albanian temper.
Oh yes.
But he knew how to control his temper.
Right, that's right.
You know, he really, you know, most of us, we discuss and we lose our temper and, you know, all of a sudden we start shouting at each other, you know. Not him, he knew how to control. But you could see that he was, many times he would boil under his, but he knew how to control his temper. And yet, when he started to talk about it, his tone was even, and yet his words were so sharp you could tell that he was really troubled about what was going on.
Right.
But he never showed his temper. You know,
Never raised his voice.
Never raised his voice.
PhD from Boston University, and he wrote, I think the thesis was Beethoven and the Revolution, and we gave him a little party, and a group of us gathered together and gave a party in my restaurant. I didn't have this restaurant then, at one of my other restaurants, and he just opened up, and because he just wouldn't open up to everyone. It was a small gathering. I think we were about 20 of us, and he just opened up about things, in general, about the whole, the world and the Albania.
When he died, we lost a great man that will never be replaced. But we had to go. We had to go and keep what Fan Noli left us. We had to keep the churches. We had to keep the organization. We had to keep the newspapers. And everything else what Fan Noli worked for. The young people to keep the language and traditions of Albania. All these 40 years, which now we're celebrating, Free Albania organization in Diria has been mostly active in America, and is the only Albanian American newspaper who was printed weekly without interpretation time. The Diria prints historical articles, national articles, news from Albania, and news from Albanian colonies. Every year we have a picnic, and we gather up about 2,000 to 3,000 people, and every year on 28 November we celebrate Albanian Independence Day, and also we have 6,000 to 1,000 people every year. We still going to continue this program because we figure that Albanian colony is needed for the Free Albania organization and weekly newspaper.
Silence for our many Albanian courageous leaders and our relatives and friends who are deceased. I përjeqim kujtimin.
Drizën telën si selit me gazë hare. Sa kujtojmë të ndarjet madhe merën si për ne.
Fan Noli, as everybody knows, was a great man, and we all have a respect for him before his death and after.
He was a great scholar. He was a translator. He was also a great patriot and a great politician. He dedicated his life to the Albanian.
But from those who were impartial, we might find comments such as this from George Bernard Shaw, the author critic, who wrote only 6 complimentary letters in his life. And he wrote to Noli, and he said of his work, Beethoven and the French Revolution, "It is the work of a first-rate critic and biographer. I read it through from end to end with the utmost satisfaction, being myself a connoisseur as musician, critic, and artist, philosopher by profession."
For my part, Fan Noli He was A1 in my book.
Because of Fan S Noli, Bishop Fan S Noli, we have a community here. Without the church, there'd be no Lydia, no Vatra, there'd be nothing.
He just had such a wonderful feeling about things of that. He was a humanitarian of the first before he was anything else.
He was telling us so many times, best way to do, boys, you gotta have gathering together, strong organization.
Yes. And he was capable of handling the language and the people, and he knew about theology because he was a very well-educated man.
He was such a giant, such a big tree, but we were right under him, you know, as a tree. We could not see him because he covered us all. You know?
He was a good shepherd, respected, admired, obeyed. We cherished him when he lived, and we cherish him now that he's gone.